This video is sponsored by Squarespace. You've been dry brushing the hard way, and this $1 hack fixes 3 problems you might not even realize you're having, making your dry brushing faster, cleaner, and more fun altogether. And stick around to the end. I'll show you how this unexpected tool will keep your paint from drying out even after your palette should be dead. I've tried just about every painting hack out there, so when I find something completely new, it's rare. But this one, it was so simple, I actually felt a little dumb for never thinking of it before. Let me introduce you to the sponge. Sounds wild, right? But once I started using this, everything just worked better. But before we talk about how it saves dry brushing, let's talk about the dry brushing technique itself and its downsides. Dry brushing is amazing for texture. It brings out detail, keeps your shadow areas dark, and can create natural gradients fast. But dry brushing has 3 key problems: a dusty or chalky finish, trouble switching colors, and wasted paint. Now that we've defined the pain points, let's set up our sponge and solve our problems. Take a new kitchen sponge and run it under your faucet to completely dampen the sponge. No scrub or cleaning pads here, just a normal compressed sponge. Next, squeeze out excess water. We don't want the sponge sopping wet. If your sponge is too wet, the action of wicking your brush across the sponge will release excess water and soak your brush. To test the proper amount of water, just rub the sponge along your hand. We want it to leave a slightly damp consistency. With our sponge ready, let's move on to painting. Problem 1, a chalky finish. A chalky or speckled finish is the most common problem in dry brushing, and it stems from the core of the technique, removing the paint with a paper towel. While this is the tried and true traditional method, paper towels are actually your worst enemy when it comes to dry brushing. They pull too much moisture from the bristles, causing the paint to dry out on the brush, and that's what gives you that dusty, powdery look that frustrates painters everywhere. How our sponge fixes this. Before dabbing your domed brush into your paint, we are first going to lightly dab our brush into the damp sponge. This puts a little extra water into our brush, which will help create a smooth application later. Then dab the brush into your paint. Don't load too much, just a little bit is fine. The more paint you apply to your brush, the more paint you'll be wasting. Before we continue, let's talk about Squarespace. Squarespace has everything you need to build your online presence, and so much more. Use Squarespace Blueprint to answer a few questions and get a custom-designed website. Want something specific? Check out their templates, use their easy drag-and-drop tools to create your unique site fast. Which means more time for petting the cats, and that everyone across the world can get their adorable Mini Witch Familiar fix. And you can even own Mini Witch Familiar merchandise through Squarespace's print-on-demand feature. No matter the reason for your new website, check out squarespace.com today to start your free trial. And when you are ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/LylaMev and use code LylaMev for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Alright, back to painting. Next, offload your paint onto a texture palette, not a paper towel. A texture palette is a non-porous surface with raised texture to remove excess paint. Mine is DIY'd from bits and a dollar store serving tray, but there are dozens of options. A single sprue glued to cardboard, laser engraved MDF, any non-porous raised surface will do. With our paint removed, it's time to test on our hand. We are looking for a beautiful cloud-like consistency. If you have a streaky finish, you either have too much paint on your brush or too much water in your brush. Both of these are solved by removing more paint on a texture palette. On the other hand, if your paint isn't coming off the brush, that means your paint is too dry. Try a quick dab into the sponge and test it on your hand again. The perfect consistency of water and paint will give us a smooth gradient from our base coat to the color we are applying. However, the smooth gradient can come with a cost. You may need to apply several layers of your paint to build up to full opacity. Problem 2, color switching. So you finished dry brushing one color, how do you switch? Most people instinctively rinse the brush in water. But for dry brushes, that's a nightmare. Once those bristles get soaked, they lose the stiffness and spring you need for dry brushing, and your brush becomes unusable until it's fully dry again. But here's how the sponge completely solves this problem. Once your brush runs out of paint, just wipe it gently back and forth on the damp sponge. Keep doing this back and forth motion until the bristles return to something close to their original color. Then drag your brush across your texture palette to remove that last bit of moisture and test it on your glove or hand. If no paint transfers, you're ready for your next color. This next one is where the sponge completely changed the game for me. Problem 3, wasted paint. Until I started working on this video, I had never really considered how much paint is wasted while dry brushing. Between my paint drying on my palette, my texture palette, and my brush, it seemed like very little paint was actually placed on the model. But let's start with the one that you have no doubt experienced. As you're painting, there will be this frustrating moment that happens mid-stroke, when suddenly your brush stops leaving paint behind. But what's going on? The paint hasn't run out, it's actually just dried inside your bristles. A paint reload forces you to go through the whole process again. Palette, offload, test. Instead, we're going to lightly dab our brush into the sponge. Test it on your hand just to be safe, and continue on your merry painting way. If you want full opacity, only do this once or twice, then reload from the palette. Now here's the trick I didn't expect. Once you're done applying your color, you can create beautiful blends by creating a glaze within your dry brush. Here's how. Tap your mostly empty brush into the sponge one last time. Then test this consistency on your hand like always. What you should see is a soft, thin glaze of your paint. This translucent consistency is perfect for feathering and blending harsh dry brushing edges or subtle shifts in color. Here you can see where I'm using a tapping motion with my orange and yellow to subtly blend those colors into my previous layers. But you can also use your glaze consistency to slightly change the color of your entire miniature. After I applied my orange and yellow, I was actually disappointed that I had lost so much of the red I had applied previously. So I created a glaze consistency with my red paint and simply used upward strokes on my miniature to recapture that red I had lost. But what about wasted paint on your palette? The sponge can fix that as well. Place your paints in a plastic paint palette, plastic container, whatever, as long as it has sides and is small enough the sponge can cover it. Then simply place a second damp sponge on top. This blocks airflow, keeps the paint hydrated, and buys you way more working time. When you're done, rinse the sponge under water to clean it. We don't want the paint to dry on the sponge and make the sponge crusty and less water soluble. Before you put it away, give it ample time to dry. The last thing we want is a wet, moldy sponge in our painting drawer. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you want to support me, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.